evening, everyone. Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Tonight, as the state budget inches towards the buzzsaw, we ask, does cutting health care cost more than it saves? Is there a better way to balance the books? Also this week, the web. As public health doctor, we will find out about patientslikeme.com, and Google, tonight it should be Gargle, will tell us why they are mapping the flu. All this plus post-election web politics in the new blogosphere.
So now there's well over 100 black blogs out there comprising the Afrosphere, sometimes the Negrosphere. I like the Blackosphere myself, but most folks haven't adopted that.
But first, here are this week's online video picks. Number one, who got the housing market right when almost everyone got it wrong? Peter Schiff, president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Never heard of him? Here is Schiff on CNBC in 2006.
I think it's going to be pretty bad, and whether it starts in 07 or 08, I think, is immaterial. And I also think it's going to last not just for quarters, but for years. See, the basic problem with the U.S. economy is we have too much consumption and borrowing and not enough production and savings. And what's going to happen is the American consumer is basically going to stop consuming and start rebuilding his savings, especially when he sees his home equity evaporate. And when you have the economy 70% consumption, you can't address those imbalances without a recession. You know, rather than the recession being resisted, it should really be embraced, because the disease is all this debt-financed consumption. The cure is that we stop consuming and start saving and producing again, and that's a recession. And sometimes, you know, medicine tastes bad, but you got to swallow it.
Art Laffer, you hear him? He says the consumer's going to slow down in order to rebuild the savings. And you know that 2/3 of the American economy is driven by the consumer. Do you believe that?
No, I don't believe any of it whatsoever, Michelle. Excuse me. But, you know, what he's saying is that savings is way down in this country, but wealth has risen dramatically. The United States economy has never been in better shape. There is no tax increase coming in the next couple of years. Monetary policy is spectacular. We have freer trade than ever before. And not only that, but there are no incomes policies things here. I think Peter's just totally off base.
And yes, his name really is Laffer. As for Schiff, is that Treasury Secretary job still available, Barack? I sense it won't be going to Assistant Treasury Secretary Neil Kashkari, another great name for this. His name is really Kashkari. He is too busy being humiliated by Congress for helping with the bailout. Here's video pick number 2.
And I'm just wondering how you feel about an AIG giving $503 million worth of bonuses out of one hand and accepting $154 billion from hard-working taxpayers. You know, because I'm trying to make sure you get it. You know, I mean, and you know what really bothers me is because all these other people who are lined up, they say, well, is Kashkari a chump? We can just go in there, and I'm not saying they are. I don't know. We can go in there, we'll get some money, and you know what AIG did? They even will tell you they're coming back for some more.
Video pick number 3. Did you do a double take at that fake New York Times that people are handing out on the streets of the city last week? Here's how H. Schweppes reported the reaction on Vimeo.com.
Early this morning, commuters nationwide were delighted to find out that while they were sleeping, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan had come to an end. According to the newspaper's publishers, 1.2 million papers were printed at 6 different presses. They were driven to a number of pre-arranged pickup locations, where thousands of volunteers stood ready to pass them out on the street. Articles in the paper announced the establishment of national health care, the abolition of corporate lobbying, a maximum wage for CEOs, and of course, the end of the war. The paper includes international, national, New York, and business sections, as well as editorials, advertisements, and even a page of corrections.
I don't know, it's like a dream, you know, you talk about it, everybody's talking about it, it's like this war needs to end, and here the war is over. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe it.
Hope you got your copy of that paper. Now, you saw the China Olympics, but did you know there is a China Peasant Olympics as well? At first glance, this looks like a satire from The Onion, but it's real and serious. This is video pick 4 from AFP TV.
Around 3,500 athletes from across rural China are competing in 180 events in 15 different sports. The Peasant Games feature popular sports like basketball and athletics, but it's the special events like the tire push, seedling throwing, and the four-legged team sprint that sets this competition apart. The Games started in 1988, just 10 years after China began its opening and economic reform policy. Despite the nation's rapid development, much of the country's rural areas are poorer and less developed than urban centres. Being a farmer is often looked down on by China's growing middle class. Games organisers say the event is designed to show that the central government cares about China's 900 million peasants, a message officials are keen to promote, as the disparity between China's rich and poor threatens to undermine the social stability of the nation.
And video pick number 5 looks real at first glance, but in fact is a satire from The Onion. It announces a $100,000 prize to anyone who can make a good YouTube video.
Because the idea of making a good video is new to so many of its users, YouTube offered a list of suggestions, including have some reason for making a video other than I own a camera, make sure the subject of the video can be seen, and shoot the video while sober. Hundreds of YouTube users have posted videos stating their intention to enter the contest, including Tamala Klebert of Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Well, my dog farts is pretty funny. Maybe I'll just try to catch him doing that and put lots of sound effects.
The contest also inspired John Malkin, who has already posted dozens of poorly lit, pointless videos on the site.
I never thought of making a good video. It's hard enough to remember to shout directly into the camera without worrying about what to say.
YouTube says the 10-person judging panel will be searching for a video that holds their attention, but not because it is so utterly mystifying they can't stop watching. When making their decision, judges will not consider ratings and comments from the public.
We will not be affected by viewer consensus that the video is, quote, awesome LOL, the greatest ever, or for that matter, that it, quote, totally gay sucks, you suck, retarded fag.
If and when a winning video is chosen, it will be placed in the new Actually Good tab on YouTube's website. For now, however, the section remains empty.
And that video is funny, but for the record, we have no problem finding at least 5 good videos every week. And there they were, this week's online video picks. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. And now we know it. A great internet campaign can help to win a presidency. But then, can the web drive ongoing change? We are joined by 2 guys who are working at just this, but in different ways. David Moore tries to make Congress transparent. He manages opencongress.org. It's free, open source, nonpartisan, nonprofit. And with us via Skype from Culver City, California, filmmaker Robert Greenwald, the man behind Brave New Films, plus he made the hard-hitting documentary about Fox News and the Bush administration called Outfoxed. Welcome back, both of you. Thank you for joining us. Robert Greenwald, let me go to you first. You started out of a concern for Fox News, and you moved from there to more straight political films?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We did a film about Walmart. We did a film about Iraq for sale and war profiteering. And the last year and a half, we've been doing short videos online, which have been seen, by the way. We just passed 35 million views total for all of our short videos.
That's great. We're going to show an example of one of your series called Meet the Bloggers. Do you want to set this up for us? We're going to show the Baratunde Thurston one.
Well, Meet the Bloggers is a weekly show that we're doing, which is available online at Meet the Bloggers. And each week, the bloggers take on a different issue. They analyze it. They provide depth. They provide interpretation. And by the way, we've had Senator Reid on. We've had Nancy Pelosi on. We've had Michael Moore on, Rachel Maddow. A really interesting mixture of guests from the cultural world and the political world.
All right, so let's take a look at this edition of Meet the Bloggers with blogger Baratunde Thurston.
Hi, I'm Baratunde Thurston, and I have 4 jobs. I'm a comedian, stand-up comedy, focusing on politics. I'm a political writer and blogger with Jack and Jill Politics and the Huffington Post. I work by day at The Onion as the web editor, and I'm a volunteer for Barack Obama. Jack and Jill Politics is a black bougie perspective on U.S. politics. Jill, my co-founder, she started it in the summer of 2006, brought me on about a month later, and her name's Cheryl Conti. She blogs as Jill Tubman. I'm Baratunde Thurston. I blog as Jack Turner. And when we began, there weren't that many outlets for black political thought online. There were a lot of black websites. There was a lot of black blogging about music and culture, but not so much focus on politics. So we saw an opening to add a voice to the mix, and many others have poured in since then, and some who've been around from before then. Afro Netizen, Black Agenda Report, African American Political Pundit. So now there's well over 100 black blogs out there comprising the Afrosphere, sometimes the Negrosphere. I like the Blackosphere myself, but most folks haven't adopted that.
So, Robert Greenwald, I think I get what you're doing. You're reaching your pretty wide Brave New Films audience to let them know about other bloggers and media people who you think they'd be interested in. Like, I'll bet a lot of people around the country don't know that there is a blackosphere, as he called it, or that many black-oriented blogs, and you use your platform as kind of a megaphone. Is that it?
Yes, we use the ability to reach an audience. We use the fact that there are intelligent, smart, well-thoughtful bloggers like Baratunde, like Liliana, like Roberto Lovato, who are on the show on a semi-regular basis and can probe into the issues in a way that unfortunately is harder and harder to get from the traditional media, and be able to take some time to say, what is the bailout? How is it working? Who is it working for? Those kinds of questions.
And I think we have your homepage from the Brave New Films website ready to load up here, and I want to take a look at this. Let's see, is this up? Do we have that up? Okay, there we go. And it says, Lieberman must go. Well, Lieberman did not go. So from your perspective, say it ain't so. But just tell us a little bit about what the homepage is. People can, I see a lot of video screens to click through to, so you have a lot of video options right on the homepage?
Yes, we're a video company. We use video, film, if you will, to tell stories using images. So at bravenewfilms.org, we have a variety of our different campaigns, from the Lieberman one past the McCain one. We're now working with the ACLU on a Close Guantanamo campaign, Close Gitmo. We're beginning to work on campaigns around the first 100 days of the Obama administration. We have a campaign, The War on Greed, dealing with private equity. So the variety of them, but the common denominator, and Fox, of course, we're still going with Fox attacks because they haven't stopped doing their distortions and propaganda. The common denominator, it's video. So you look at it and you say, you know what, I didn't know that. I want my friend to know it, or my relative, or somebody I go to church with. So you hit forward, and immediately you are involved in taking action. And for us, ultimately, that's the critical piece. It's not enough to get angry. It's not even enough just to educate yourself. Every single one of us needs to do something.
David Moore from Open Congress, thank you for your patience, first of all. And I guess yours is also a form of activism, but a different kind of activism.
That's right. So on Open Congress, what we try to encourage people to do is to watchdog all the members of Congress and get involved in the political process. Right now, the contemporary American political system, a tremendous amount rides on these presidential elections. We have one every 4 years, and that's great. Elections are great. They're an integral part of the process. But what we see is that there's a tremendous amount of activity and like almost an explosion, and so much is pent up and waiting for this one day, for one November 4th to come. And then after that, there's a little bit of a sense of a hangover. So what we're trying to encourage is more ways for people to be involved in politics in their everyday lives and to just integrate it into things that they already do online and activities they already do in their communities. So opencongress.org is one tool that allows people to sort of try to get in touch with what's really happening in Congress, in the same way that maybe they could use a social networking website to keep in touch with what their friends are doing, or they could use a service like Netflix to manage their DVDs. people have ways to do this, but they don't have ways to figure out what's going on with the government.
You are the answer to a joke that people have been making since the election. You're the serious answer, and the joke was, well, what are these Obama campaign addicts going to do with their lives now that the campaign is over?
Yeah, I saw that. Well, there's actually a huge amount of work to do still. I mean, there's still 435 representatives and 100 senators in the U.S. Congress, and they're confronting a huge array of issues every day, and there's still thousands of bills under consideration, and they all need watchdogging. And so, President-elect Obama comes into office with a great position on government transparency issues. He's demonstrated an understanding and a commitment for them. And that still has to be put into place, so there's still a lot to see on that front. But there's reason to believe that the executive branch, at least, is going to see some significant improvements in transparency. And we'll wait to see how that shapes out exactly. But government transparency in Congress is still going to be a huge issue. And right now, Congress is really refusing to take some very common sense steps to make this public information actually public.
And we're going to see another Meet the Bloggers video in a minute having to do with this issue of whether Joe Lieberman should keep his committee chairmanship appointed by the Democrats or, approved by the Democrats, even though he campaigned against Obama. But I'm curious what's going on your site right now, because this lame duck Congress has started, and I think it's fair to say it's already completely inflamed over these financial crisis issues, like whether to bail out the oil companies and whether to extend unemployment insurance for people who've been losing their jobs all through the year.
That's absolutely right. So those are the two hottest issues on our site right now, and we're seeing an amazing amount of activity with people jumping in and self-organizing and also leaving comments and taking actions and calling their members of Congress. So the most important, or the hottest issue on our site right now with our user community is the issue of unemployment extensions. Right now the Senate is considering a bill that's called H.R. 6867 that would extend unemployment benefits by 13 weeks, and in some cases more in some states. There's a lot of public support for this that we're seeing on our site, a tremendous amount of public support. And so in the comments section on opencongress.org, people are organizing and sharing information about what's really happening with the bill. But as the other thing that you mentioned is that right now they're trying to attach a bailout of the big three automakers to that bill. So what the Senate is considering this week is whether or not that package is going to pass. And if that doesn't, then they'll probably strip out the auto bailout and vote instead on just the unemployment benefits later this week.
So let's do a little bit of a direct comparison of the sites of the two of you on this Joe Lieberman issue. Let's see a little bit of, I think we're going to see first how it was playing out on Brave New Films.
How is Joe Lieberman not really a progressive?
Well, the argument we're making, we just released a big report on Lieberman yesterday. And the argument we're making is that we'll concede that Lieberman was a stronger progressive a few years ago. He had a good record on environmental issues. He had a good record on civil rights issues. And but over the past year or two, he has lurched to the right. And it's not just in foreign policy. I think that's the common myth, is that Lieberman is just bad in Iraq and he's with us 95% of the other time. But the real issue here is that he's actually bad on domestic policy too.
Yeah, I remember when he blocked the Hurricane Katrina investigation. Man, that made me so angry. So, but there's also a political side to this, which is it a smart move? Is it too early for a preemptive strike against Lieberman to remove him from that committee? Because there's still 3 Senate seats that are up in the air. We might get a filibuster-proof majority if we keep Lieberman. So is it too early to try to push him out the door?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to make any bold moves right now, but there's certainly something to be said for accountability, and he shouldn't. I don't think any Democrat really wants him to go scot-free. I hope no one does. But it should be said that he is not a strong progressive, and if you want a strong progressive vote to get you to 60 votes, he is not a reliable vote in this case.
All right, so Brave New Films on its Meet the Bloggers series, and more of their advocacy video, in this case, making the case against keeping Joe Lieberman head of the Homeland Security Committee. Let's take a look at the opencongress.org homepage from yesterday and tell us what we're seeing here, Dave, where Lieberman was the top issue.
So one of the things that our site does is it pulls out what people are searching for and really looking for. And in this case, people were looking for information about Senator Lieberman, which, because of his support of Senator McCain in the recent presidential election, the Democrats were considering taking some action as a caucus to discipline him or maybe possibly take away his his chairmanship of the Homeland Security Committee. In the end, what they did mostly behind closed doors was let him keep his committee chairmanship. But the fact that they did it behind closed doors is an example of why we need sites like Open Congress and why we need citizen oversight and participation in this. Because what we do on the site is to try to bubble up the best information about what's really happening. And so because so much of this happens in the hallways and the closed off systems of Congress, we really need people to find and share the best information. And in this case, people were looking for information about Senator Lieberman and about what the likely odds were of him, different scenarios of him losing different committee chairmanships.
And Robert Greenwald, filmmaker in California, you didn't get your way on this one, despite your advocacy.
Well, it's not about us getting our way. It's about the sort of the democratic process, and many people across the country who were distraught at Lieberman's kind of grandstanding, his partisan behavior. And frankly, not only his attacks on Obama, but he went into the Senate race, attacked Al Franken, which is a very close race. So you could say that there's a case to be made that he's actually cost the Democrats at least one seat, or hopefully not. Hopefully Franken will still pull it out. And again, I would agree with David here. It's an aspect of wanting an open process, and the work that he does and that his site does is a very important component, because the first step is getting to know what's going on. Then you decide what action to take or not. Now,
we're almost out of time for this segment, but I want to show an example of one more piece of post-election technology. You know how Ronald Reagan started the tradition it's become of a Saturday radio address, a few minutes of just the president speaking directly to the public, not being interviewed by a reporter, the Saturday radio address? Well, President-elect Obama has already transformed the Saturday radio address into the Saturday radio and YouTube video address.
Today, the leaders of the G20 nations, a group that includes the world's largest economies, are gathering in Washington to seek solutions to the ongoing turmoil in our financial markets. I'm glad President Bush has initiated this process, because our global economic crisis requires a coordinated global response. And yet, as we act in concert with other nations, we must also act immediately here at home to address America's own economic crisis. This week, amid continued volatility in our markets, we learned that unemployment insurance claims rose to their highest levels since September 11th, 2001. We've lost jobs for 10 straight months, nearly 1.2 million jobs this year, many of them in our struggling auto industry. And millions of our fellow citizens lie awake each night, wondering how they're going to pay their bills, stay in their homes, and save for retirement.
All right, so there you have it. Ground up, internet interactivity helped make the new president and the new Congress, and ground up internet interactivity from the ground up will help hold them accountable for both policy and transparency. David Moore, Robert Greenwald, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Welcome.
Coming up next, slashing the New York budget. What have we learned from the last time this happened so big time, 33 years ago? It's Brian Lehrer Live.
Hi, I'm Matthew Goldstein, the Chancellor of the City University of New York. Look who's teaching at CUNY. Michio Kaku, string field theorist and international authority on theoretical physics. John Corigliano, Academy Award and Pulitzer Prize winner in music. David Nassau, winner, Bancroft Prize for Best Biography. Jill Barganetti, Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. Gregory Rabassa, recipient the National Medal of Arts in 2006 from President Bush. Elizabeth Nunez, winner, American Book Award. Godfrey Gums, American Physical Society Fellow and member, New York Academy of Sciences. World-class talent, award-winning scholars, CUNY is their classroom, CUNY is your university.
Hey, Sarah.
Oh my gosh, he's so cute.
Been doing like I taught you.
Love the new tattoo, Sarah.
Dude, that's Sarah. The girl in the pink shirt. That's the girl I was telling you about.
Theater 2 on your left. Hey, Sarah. What color underwear today?
Hey, Sarah. So when are you going to post something new?
Anything you post online, anyone can see. So think before you post.
It's Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. With the economy in a punishing bind, you would think our lawmakers in Albany would make the budget fit the times. But the lame duck Senate leadership and Governor Patterson cannot agree on his proposed deep cuts to schools and hospitals and more. What's the financial impact of that inaction? What will the human cost be when the new Senate finally does act? Well, Stephen Berger has been through this before. He headed the Financial Control Board that took over the city's finances when New York City was near bankruptcy in the mid-1970s. He now chairs Odyssey Investment Partners. With us as well, Nicholas Freudenberg, Distinguished Professor of Public Health at CUNY and Hunter College. He has studied the impact of draconian cutbacks. Welcome to both of you. Mr. Berger, give us some history. Where were you in the 1970s and what did you do?
Well, I started as Social Services Commissioner, and in the middle of the crisis, Governor Carey moved me to run the control board. I think we should understand first that Albany is not behaving any differently now than it did at the beginning of that crisis. You know, they're in denial. It's the ostrich stage. They go to anger. They're the hyenas. Then they go to, you know, they contract and they try to go to resignation, you know, and then ultimately, hopefully, you get wisdom. We're in the same, it's the beginning of that process. The trouble is this is much worse.
Much worse than the 1970s fiscal crisis?
Not close. And the reason for that is this is a much deeper structural crisis. We had a couple of problems in the 70s. We overspent like drunks and we didn't know what we were doing. We now know how we're spending because the budgetary processes are in place. We had a culture of borrowing, and there were no governors on behavior. We fixed a lot of that. The problem that we didn't fix is that we've built a system in this state. By the way, California's got the same problems. Maybe the country's got the same problems. Of delivery of services, education, healthcare, which we can't afford. We have been funding it all basically on one industry.
Now, you go back to the 70s too, and you've studied that history as well and watched it in real time. I think people regret some of the cuts that were made because they turned out to be so ruinous for the next decade or two for the city and the state. Is that correct?
Yes. My colleagues and I, just a few years ago, actually wanted to understand what had been the long-term impact of some of the cuts made in the 1970s. And so we looked at 3 health conditions, HIV, homicide, and tuberculosis. And we looked at how the cuts that were made in the through between 1975 and sort of 1980 affected services that were related to those 3 conditions. And what we found was that about $10 billion in 2004 dollars, $10 billion in cuts in municipal services in the 1970s led to costs only in homicide, AIDS, and tuberculosis of about $50 billion. And so for every dollar the city saved by cutting budgets in health and human services, it generated $5 in costs for New York City taxpayers.
But if they had such a budget deficit, if they didn't have the money, how are they going to make the investment, even if your numbers are right on what it would have prevented?
Well, I think there's this sense that these budget crises are inevitable and that there's no other way of responding to them other than to make service cuts that affect poor people particularly difficult. And certainly we face very tough times then, and we face a very hard economic situation now. There's no doubt about that. But that the richest city in the world wouldn't be able to find a way of providing a way for its poorest citizens to be protected, I think is just very troubling. And the fact that Congress could, find $700 billion to support an industry, responsible for this crisis, and not find the money to deal with some of the problems we're facing.
So again, still looking back, would you revise anything that was cut at that time, even just from a fiscal standpoint, never mind the humanitarian standpoint, because maybe it was penny wise and pound foolish?
I have a slightly different take on some of the same judge. I don't think I fundamentally disagree, but what I do disagree about is I would have cut differently. And I think cutting is the wrong word. All right. We have built a delivery system in this state which does not deliver the services it's supposed to deliver, even though it's costing us far more than it should be costing us. All right? In healthcare, for example, we're spending enough money between Medicare and Medicaid and the insurers in this state to insure everybody. We just spend the money badly. The issue for us, and it's going to be an issue for this country, and the stuff that we're the richest, whatever, is irrelevant if our costs are greater than what our resources are. We have to do something we've never really done, which is make a decision on the level and the quality of service we want to have, and then restructure the delivery systems from the point of view of the customer. Our delivery systems, we talk about healthcare and we talk about education, we talk about that. We're talking about the teachers union, we're talking about the workforce, we're talking about providers. We don't have a system designed for customers. And until we change the structures, and politically this is a nightmare, because the customer doesn't own any local legislators, the providers do.
And we know how influential the teachers union and other unions are over the state legislature, certainly as influential as the most powerful corporate sectors for the most part, I think the record indicates.
More.
But what would your restructuring look like? Can you give us a vision of it?
Yeah, I can give you a vision more in healthcare because I've just finished heading the state commission on that. We have too much inpatient capacity. We have too long a length of stay. We have too few outpatient availabilities in this state. We spend our reimbursement is cockeyed in terms of how we reimburse, for example, for OBGYN versus for thoracic cardiac surgery. And we don't have electronic medical records. And the answer is we could create a system. It would cost money to do it, but we could do it frankly, inside the budgets, which would over a 5 to 8 year period just change the delivery network.
Save a lot of money, deliver services better, you're saying?
Probably cost the same, but stop the growth in costs and totally change the quality of service.
Is restructuring the key to saving public health saving the budget too?
I think I agree with Steve's diagnosis, but not his treatment.
Prescription.
So I think we are spending a huge amount on healthcare and getting a very poor return for it. But I think the solution really can't come within New York alone, although there are many things New York could do, but really require the United States to join the rest of the civilized world and to have a national health plan. And that is the solution. And I'm hopeful that we'll see some steps in the right direction in the new Obama administration. I don't think it will happen in a single transformation, but I think the notion of providing coverage for children, for older people, expanding Medicare, those are steps in the right direction. And I certainly agree that shifting our healthcare system to more emphasis on prevention and primary care will save money, will improve services. Some of those things we need to invest in the short term to make those changes happen. And we need elected officials who have the backbone to make those changes.
You were shrugging. I don't know if the camera caught you shrugging. Why were you shrugging?
You know, because I believe, even with the new administration, that the states are the laboratories for these kinds of changes and not the federal government. I think the Congress, as difficult it is to move state legislatures, whether it's Albany or Sacramento, Congress is harder. And I think that, particularly in healthcare, that the models for change that are being developed in this country are being developed in places like New York and Minnesota and Oregon and other places. And they will be the laboratories for change. So I disagree. I'm not waiting for Washington. Is worse than waiting for Godot. We got to do most of it here to start.
In the meantime, something's going to get cut just to balance the budget in the short term. This $2 billion budget shortfall for the current fiscal year that the state is in through April 1st, and then it's like another $10 billion, I think I heard that number, or something very large for the next fiscal year. And there are no bad guys here. This is, you know, SUNY and CUNY competing against K through 12, competing against poor people's health care. How do you,
well,
you don't agree with the premise, but we'll get to that in a minute. How do you prioritize?
First, I think you can't look at cuts alone. You need to look at revenue. And there are groups that have benefited from the prosperity of the last many years.
You're not going to raise $10 billion in new taxes, are you?
I think that there's a significant part that can be raised, and I think that people who benefited most have to pay a bigger share. That's only fair. It is not fair that the crisis that was created by the banking and the insurance and the investment industry should be borne by poor people. Second, I think there's some sacred cow programs where we're spending money and there's no evidence that those programs make a difference. I can give you two examples. A recent report by the Independent Budget Office that New York spends about $350 million a year on educational assessment. No evidence that that makes any difference in the classroom and improves outcomes. A moratorium, a year, 2 years, 3 years, an educational assessment, put that back in the classroom rather than firing teachers and increasing classroom size. Number two, I've worked for the last couple decades doing research at Rikers Island. About 100,000 people a year pass through Rikers Island. Almost half of those spend 3 days or less in jail. Another very large group is there because they can't spend several months there because they can't make $500 bail. And yet it costs $252 a day to incarcerate someone at Rikers Island. We could be saving, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars with relatively simple changes. So I think we need to look much more closely at what are the services, where can we make some savings, where we're not getting value for our dollar.
I agree, but I think it's bupkis. I think it's a very small amount of the problem we face. The revenue side is much worse than anybody's thinking about. We're talking about the industry that has supported this city now for the last 15 years. You know, what is it, 5% of the industrial base provides 23% of the revenues. Those revenues are trashed. And they're not just trashed for this year. I mean, there are some institutions, and beyond the ones that disappeared, not going to pay taxes for a long time.
You're talking about big finance companies.
I'm talking about big finance companies. And I'm also talking about, I don't know what the final number is going to be. I think everybody is low on how many jobs we're going to lose as a result of the financial service industry collapse and change. By the way, when it comes back, it ain't never going to be what it was, because you just think about it for a second. You had an industry that was levered 32 to 1, and now it's going to be levered 10 to 1. The profits are going to be different. Our revenue base, we can't do this on a revenue alone, and you can't do it on borrowing alone, and you can't do it on incidental cuts.
And we're not going to solve it tonight, unfortunately. It is a moment of great hope in America for many people after the election of Barack Obama, and at the same time a moment when New Yorkers and everyone are holding our breaths to see how bad this economy is going to get. Thank you both very much for having this piece of the discussion.
Thank you, Brian.
It's Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Next up, Google Maps the flu and patientslikeme.com after this.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college. No, I didn't quit my job. I'm finishing my degree with the CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life. Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY. And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
Watch Canapé, the French cultural magazine show, Thursdays on CUNY TV.
Mama was queen of the mambo, Papa was king of the Congo. Deep down in the jungle, I started banging my first bongo. Every monkey like to be in my place instead of me, 'cause I'm the king of bongo, baby, I'm the king of bongo bong. I went to the big town where there is a lot of sound, from the jungle to the city looking for a bigger crown. So I play my boogie for the people of big city, but they don't go crazy when I banging on my boogie. I'm the king of the bongo, king of the bongo bong. Hear me when I come, baby. place instead of me, cause nobody go crazy when I'm banging on my boogie. I'm a king without a crown, hanging loose in a big town, but I'm a king of bongo, baby, I'm the king of bongo bong.
It's Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. The web is a powerful tool for personal health. Not just information sites like WebMD, but now there's patientslikeme.com. It's an online health community, for profit, where people can chart the precise course of their own diseases. Serious ones like HIV, ALS, and depression. It's a kind of medical crowdsourcing. The co-founders join us, Ben Haywood and James Haywood. Welcome to the program. Thank you very much. Tell us what this is and how it got started.
So Patients Like Me, as you said, we build online communities for patients with life-changing illnesses. And what's different about what patients are doing within our communities is they're sharing detailed health information within the community, and that allows for ultimately finding out what happens to a patient like you. So you get to understand your disease and put it in the context of all the other information on the site shared with patients.
I think what's really remarkable is that for the first time we're giving a group of people the power to learn things on their own, sometimes even faster than the medical research system can do it in the conventional way. But more important, we're creating information that never actually existed. It's sort of, what is it really like to live with an illness?
Well, that's so interesting that you say it never really existed. Isn't this what people are finding out from their doctors?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you don't have to sort of criticize doctors or think about this to think about ways of making patients' lives better. When you look at an illness such as ALS or major depression, what you have is most of the interaction and the understanding of that disease happens in the home. The patient knows how they're doing. The patient is doing most of the things that affect their function and their ability to relate to the world. And those are the problems where we have the least effective tools in learning from a group and how to do things better.
Now, it's not just personal health information, as I said at the beginning. There's also a discovery aspect to this. You're actually doing, in a way, open source epidemiology to discover public health patterns out there. Do you want to use the Parkinson's as your example?
Jamie's the drug discovery guy, so I'll let him take that one.
Well, you know, actually, let's just look at a classic case, and actually I'll use ALS because that's where my experience in drug discovery comes from. What happens in the field is you'll get a discovery out of the preclinical realm. Someone's discovered something in a laboratory, and patients are so desperate with this illness that they'll begin to use that clinically. So you can look at the last 10 years and drugs such as Celebrex, which was used for rheumatoid arthritis, was used to treat ALS, or minocycline, an antibiotic. Some of these drugs made patients worse when they actually were tested in trials. So the patients who were on drugs did significantly worse than the ones that were not. But it took 5 years to find that out. And in that time, thousands of patients were doing it. In the case of one of the things that's going on now in our community, there was a discovery that lithium slowed ALS down. It was published in a prestigious journal in a real clinical trial with real preclinical data. So 9 months after that, we have actually now got data on 300 patients. To give you a sense of scale, 16 patients from the original trial. So 300 patients volunteered their information, probably out of 1,000 or 1,200 patients in the world taking it. And we know, and it's hard to say the exact amount we know because in science you can't ever prove a negative, but we know that the original finding wasn't true. So in less than 9 months, rather than the typical 3 to 5 years, we have refuted a major published study that changed the way patients...
I'm not sure I get it yet. How did you uncover this? How did people know to report their lithium experiences to you?
So, I mean, it was initiated by patients. I mean, our community started taking it. It's a great story, actually. The study was published in February of this year, and as Jamie mentioned, there were 16 patients on drug in the study. Before that paper was studied, based on a Google-translated article from an Italian newspaper, 16 patients were already in our system January before that was published. And then, you know, basically they asked us for some additional tools so they could share more information, lithium blood levels and dosing, and began to track more and more data. And actually what was exciting about this trial is because it was patients sort of engaged and led, the patients not on drug were actually more engaged in the process in the community because they understood their information was being part of a trial that was going to actually show something, you know, and so it was very powerful. I mean, it's a great story.
That's a great story.
And what makes it different than a blog is we're not collecting, I feel better, or I am better. We're collecting on February 15th, every part of my body functioned this way on March 15th, and we're collecting that for thousands of people. So when you look at that in the way that you can look at sort of when did I start this treatment? How do people do before and after? That's the kind of power you get when you use a sort of real information.
Now, speaking of health and the web, it turns out that Google is mapping the flu, part of their Predict and Prevent initiative aimed at detecting all kinds of pathogens before they get out of hand. From Google, Katie Bacon joins us via Skype from San Francisco. Katie, thanks so much for doing this. Hello from New York.
Well, thank you for having me today, Brian.
How does this work?
So what we discovered is that by tracking the popularity of certain flu-related search queries, we can accurately estimate flu levels state by state in near real time. And this is because hundreds of millions of people use Google every day. And, as you might expect, different flu queries are more popular during the winter. Queries like sunburn are more popular during the summer. But our team worked with the CDC and built a model that tests a group of queries, and we hope that doctors and public health officials find this very useful.
In other words, if Google sees that many people from New York State are searching the term flu symptoms, for example, then you use that as a marker that New York State has a flu outbreak and you report it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and actually it's not that we're reporting it to any specific entity. We're actually making it available to everyone. So any of your viewers can go to www.google.org/flutrends. And so, for example, today I noticed that a lot of states in the Southeast are kind of increasing their levels of flu activity.
So there's a flu outbreak in the Southeast, and I think we have a shot of a map that's going to reveal this. Can we put this up now? Here we go. I don't know if you can see this, Katie, but we have for the viewers to see a map of the United States that looks like a Democrat's dream. It's all blue. And contrary to any reality we know in politics, the Southeast is the darkest blue. So is that what you were referring to?
Yes, that is what I was referring to. Mm-hmm.
And so there you see, it looks like Kentucky has a big outbreak, and along the Southeast Gulf Coast there, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. So who would use this, and how would an individual benefit from it, just, let's say, from knowing that there may be an outbreak in their state, because that's as fine as you break it down as by state, correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think that it might be helpful for a mom with a kid who's sick at home just to know, is this part of a larger trend, or is this just my kid playing hooky? Maybe, maybe not. But we also hope that doctors use it. And the advantage to this system is that we're doing this in near real time, whereas the traditional disease tracking networks take 1 to 2 weeks to report flu outbreaks in the United States.
Now we have another map to put up from Google and your related sites. Let's see if we have that. Okay, here we go. What are all these yellow dots? It's a map of the world.
So this is Health Map, one of Google.org's grantees. Google.org is the philanthropic arm of Google, and Health Map is one of our biggest grantees. What they do is monitor online news articles to predict and detect disease outbreaks as they happen. So, if you scroll over to Southeast Asia, you might see something about avian flu. But we think that Health Map is just a very promising effort in this new field of digital detection to predict and prevent disease.
So is this a kind of Google version of what you're doing, or how does this dovetail?
Well, there's obviously a lot of overlap, and I think the common theme is that one of the things that will happen in the new information age is that we can begin to overlay previously disconnected information. So on our website, we can see that MS, which is more frequent in northern latitudes than it is in southern latitudes, is reflected when we look at our MS community versus the population density. We actually have a part of our site where we ask everyone who is depressed in America, who's on our site, how are you feeling today? And so we can track the daily mood of each state and see whether that varies by weather or other variables, or now whether or not they have a flu outbreak in their environment. So I think there's an opportunity here to learn immense amounts of information. I think one of the distinctions that's important and worthwhile is there's sort of two kinds of information. One is how can we help people structure and collect information in the most effective personal way? That's what we do as a company. How do we figure your problem out? And then the second part that I think that tools like that Google bring to bear are how do we look at secondary observations and learn things that we never could have imagined learning by collecting sort of much more indirect information.
Right, through individuals.
Through individuals.
Personal story. How'd you get into this?
Yeah, so Jamie and I are brothers, and unfortunately our third brother, Stephen, got diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease back in 1989 or 99. And at the time, Jamie actually started an institute and started doing drug discovery in ALS, and it's something institute called the ALS Therapy Development Institute. Really an amazing research institute doing hardcore in vivo drug discovery. And patients like me sort of came out of his sort of working with patients, being a primary caregiver for for Stephen, our brother, working with doctors and biotechs, and he had sort of the idea of patients like me actually using, ironically, Match.com and sort of saying, these are just clinical assessment tools. Why don't patients have clinical assessment tools online? And he recruited myself and our other co-founder, Jeff Cole, who's our CTO, and we got going.
That's great. These are amazing examples of the user-generated internet discovering public health information that traditional means cannot. It really is amazing. Katie, is there any concern that you think people should have about the line between Google.com, the corporate site that we usually think of, the search engine, and Google.org, which is your project? Like, if we start searching flu symptoms and seeing our searches reported on .org as a public health measure, are we then going to be, sold drug advertisements and stuff by you, or is there any privacy implication? Should people be concerned about that?
People really don't need to worry about that because the system doesn't rely on any individual data. We're only looking at patterns and huge quantities of search data, and of course we at Google.org couldn't have done this without the help of Google.com and the fact that so many people find it useful and helpful to them in their daily lives. So really there's not an issue with privacy. I think we don't have plans to put any ads on the site at this time.
How about with the two of you, because you're having very personal information posted by individuals?
So we have a really different take on privacy. We have something called an openness philosophy on our site, and really it talks about the value of openly sharing health information. And I think that's proven out in how our site, patients like me and the communities, affect individual patients' lives every day. I think by sharing information on the site, they really understand and can manage their disease better on a personal basis. And I think so every day they sort of understand that value of sharing the information.
That's fascinating. Now, yours is a business. It sounds like a not-for-profit service. How do you make money on this?
There are businesses that help people. That doesn't operate.
Yeah, it's nicely aligned. We get to help patients, and actually, our business is really around selling this aggregate information to the life sciences industry, and we're very explicit about with our communities. They know that's part of the thing, and in fact, in most of our communities, when you talk about it and the business model does come up, the patients actually say, sell, 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 anything to sort of get these companies involved. So
the life sciences industry means the pharmaceutical companies?
Pharmaceutical, medical device, actually payers as well. And what we're really doing is we have a suite of services for marketing all the way into evidence-based medicine and clinical research. And as Jamie mentioned, we really want to push into the discovery phase as well. We think there's actually use for this information across the board.
I want you to imagine, so I've spent 10 years doing drug discovery, and I think it's frustrating to think about helping patients that way because it takes so long and it's so difficult, and there's so much wrong with the way we do science and the way we connect patients to research today.
I mean, the usual clinical trials.
It's not just the clinical trials. There's actually a whole disconnect between the way research really happens, that insights turn into questions that get rolled up into bigger questions that get really answered in science, and that's all broken in medicine. And the vision that I and all of us believe in is that there are a group of people that are willing to share their lives for their own self-interest and for the interest of others, to connect to the people who have the resources and the desire to help them. And that intersection needs to be tight. It needs to be voluntary. It needs to be open. It needs to work. And you can imagine genetics, drug discovery, biomarkers, everything working through that.
Well, this is all very exciting from the for-profit side, from the not-for-profit side. Katie from Google, thank you very much. Guys, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing this.
Thank you very much.
Well, today, New York officially renamed the Triborough Bridge for Robert F. Kennedy. Had he lived, Robert F. Kennedy would have been 83 years old tomorrow. Like a certain youthful politician today, Kennedy raised the hopes of a new generation. So let's take 2 minutes at the end of our program to listen to him interviewed by Merv Griffin in 1967.
Perhaps the major problem we have within government, but I think it's the great problem that all of us have in society, as to how we're going to come back to the idea that the individual is important, and that the society exists for him and government exists for him, and he doesn't exist just for the rest of us.
But as the population increases, Senator,
it becomes more difficult.
It does become more difficult.
I think that for young people, the Peace Corps made a difference, because then you could see your effort, your compassion, your intelligence, changing the lives of people around the globe who desperately needed help. The Civil Rights Movement in the early 1960s was that also. But now, with the advent, for instance, of Black Power and so many of those who were involved in civil rights movements, one race turns against another, one group, one part of the population turns against another part of the population. Then a person, you don't know where you belong in all of it, and what you can do, and what role you can play. And it seems to me that has a tremendous effect in our country. I think it's more than the war, as I say. I think it's all these other things. I wouldn't think the war has an effect, and again, particularly amongst young people. Perhaps we are concerned about communism. We're concerned, we lived through Russians sweeping over Europe right after the Second World War, through Hungary, through Korea, and through perhaps the crimes of Stalin. They are born during the 1950s. They don't remember the Korean War. They don't remember the Hungarian Revolution. And they come in the 1960s when President Kennedy is talking about countries getting along with one another, systems living in peace with one another, the coexistence.
A different kind of hope monger in a different troubled time. And that's it for this week's show. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30 or anytime as a podcast at brianlehrer.tv. Send comments and your web video suggestions to brianlehrer.tv. And tune into my daily radio show weekdays at 10 a.m. on WNYC Radio, AM 820 and 93.9 FM. Tomorrow morning at 10, atheists get their say. Have a great night.